The following program may contain coarse language, violence, nudity, mature subject matter, or scenes which may not be suitable for all viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome to another edition of the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell, coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. Our studio number is PH2. And if you'd like to send us an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. On all social media sites, Xzone Radio TV. And we're coming to you around the world tonight on the Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, Xzone Broadcast Network, and Channel 54 on Simul TV. These are undoubtedly strange days here in St. Catharines. We are expecting a snowstorm in 2 days, and this ought to be another interesting thing that happens here in St. Catharines. We're right in between two lakes, Lake Ontario, Lake Erie. So we get what is called the snow lake effect, where other areas might get, let's say, 10 inches. We usually get more than 20, 22 inches. So another storm on the way, more questions, more problems, more blackouts. Who knows? My guest this hour is John MILOR, and we've had the pleasure of having John on the show before, and we're going to be talking about UFOs, ETs, and the such. And John, welcome back to the X Zone. Always a great pleasure talking to you, and to you and yours, a very happy New Year.
Yeah, thank you very much. Year of the Rabbit, I think. Today's Chinese New Year.
Wow. Happy Chinese New Year. Just, no wonder I've had a craving for chicken fried rice and Colonel Cow Pong all day long. That explains it.
Teriyaki rabbit.
Yeah. You and I were chatting briefly before we went to air, and you were saying that California is the hot spot for UFOs these days.
Yeah, there's a number of reports out saying that out of the United States, California is number one on the list, which I thought that was kind of surprising. You'd think that Nevada, with Area 51, that they'd have more. But it probably kind of goes with the size of California. I think we're the third largest state. We cover a lot of territory, north and south, and every terrain feature from the ocean to the desert to the mountains. So it's just a really big state, and it has a lot of people in it. And we're on a coast, coastline over here, and it's a tech center, and we got a nuclear power plant and a military presence that's pretty big. So it sort of makes sense that we have a lot of things here in California that might attract their interest.
Now, John, who issued this report?
This was the something about the National UFO
Reporting Center?
Yes, that's it.
Yeah,
it's
Peter
not
Davenport.
MUFON, but it's
Peter Davenport's organization.
Okay.
I don't know if you know this, but Peter Davenport lives in a decommissioned ICBM silo.
Oh, lucky dog.
Yeah.
Those are premium, not cheap.
No, but anyway, Peter's been doing this a long time, and he does a great job. And X Zone Nation, if you'd like to visit the website, it's, I believe it's NUFORC.com, or just Google the National UFO Reporting Center. John, how did you get involved in ufology? You and I have talked about this many times, but, for the people who may not have had the pleasure of listening to or seeing you before here on the show, why don't we bring them up to date? First of all, who is John MILOR? Or MILOR? How do you pronounce your family name anyway?
MILOR.
MILOR. Okay. Who are you?
Yeah. So, I've always been interested in like spiritual things. I just kind of had that bent since a young age. And I remember like as early as 5, my sister kind of was always into ghosts and stuff like that. And so my mom went and bought this set of encyclopedias. It was, what do you call it? Reader's Digest encyclopedia set. The part that was disturbing was the pentagram on the back of each copy. I don't know why they felt the need to put that there. But they had everything in there, and I read the whole thing. So I literally became encyclopedic about the paranormal from a really young age, because I read all of those. I had a
I
whole
think there were
set of.
about 13 or 14 different volumes because my mother bought me the same set. So I know exactly the set you're talking about.
Yes, yeah, there were quite a few,
Yeah.
and I read it all. And so then, as I grew up, I was go to a bookstore. I'd always gravitate to those
Mhm.
books, and usually you'd find them in the New Age section, but um, it just depends. They have them in different places. But on top of that, when I was 5 years old, um, we used to watch Star Trek like a religion,
Oh, yeah.
and it just seemed to make sense. But one time we were at my great grandmother's house, and she would frequently watch us, and she was just this really fired up
Mhm.
woman of God that um, Jesus was just all, she was all about Jesus, everything. If the music was on, it was gospel. If the TV was on, it was an evangelist. Um, and somewhere in every conversation, Jesus is going to come up somewhere. So, and it made sense. Her husband was my grandpa Rant was a minister,
There you go.
and they traveled all over the United States throughout the Great Depression, and so he was a retired minister. And uh, so, of all the people to talk about a UFO story, you wouldn't expect my grandmother Thelma. It just doesn't seem to line up. But yeah, she had this story one night when the whole family was there. It was some kind of gathering, like Christmas or whatever. And she happened to be reading the newspaper, waiting for more people to show up. And nothing formal was happening at the moment. But she was really absorbed in what she was reading. And she dropped the newspaper and she said, I have something to tell everybody. And she proceeded to read this story in the newspaper about a wild goose chase with the UFO and the cops around Madera County. And you could have literally seen it right out of the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. So I remember this back in 1975 when she read this in the newspaper. Uh, and after she read it, she dropped the newspaper and she said, when I was a little girl, I saw a UFO. And she talked about living in Kentucky. We knew she lived in the plains of Kentucky,
Mhm.
and she lived out where they didn't have any cars or anything. They had a wagon, so she'd never seen a motorized vehicle. But her and her sister saw a cigar-shaped UFO cruising along, uh, and they even saw its occupant. It had like this glass dome on the top, and the guy turned and looked at him as he went by, humanoid. And they were just like, "What is that?" They'd never seen anything even remotely like that. She said it looked like it was made out of aluminum. She'd never seen anything made of polished aluminum. It was just this fantastic thing. They ran home and they told their mom, and she took them into another room and she swore them to secrecy to never say anything about that to anyone ever again. And they didn't really know why she acted like that, but they didn't question her. Uh, they had a pretty strict home. And so her sister died while she was
Mm.
still a teenager. And so for 60 some odd years, she kept this story bottled up until that night when she's reading the newspaper. And then it jogged her memory. And she's like, wow. And now I know what those are. And then she summed it up by saying, I don't care what people think, those things are real. And she didn't go through this whole, elaborate, you know, uh, apologetics or reconciliation, to explain how can this be real and the Bible be real. She just believed
Right.
they were both real,
Mhm.
and that's how it is. Um, However, in this modern age, we have shows like Ancient Aliens and stuff, and they take this whole UFO thing and they kind of assume that if UFOs are real, then you have to believe in evolution. You have to believe that religions are mistaken identity, that we just saw advanced technology and beings from some other planet, and we made up a religion or a bunch of different religions to explain them, but that's what they really are. And now we are enlightened enough to explain them, and we can toss off the shackles of religion. And there's just a lot of baggage now that goes with UFOs that didn't exist so much in her time. So I kind of took up the mantle later on when I became born again. I was 21. I had this crazy encounter, dream, vision, and I woke up and I heard Jesus speaking in my ear and all this crazy stuff. But basically, it was almost like Ebenezer Scrooge, how he goes to sleep and he has this fantastic encounters and wakes up a completely different person the next day. And that's how it was with me.
I don't think there's anything crazy about that. I really don't. I believe that I'm a Christian. I'm not ashamed to say it. I believe in the Bible. I believe that there's a lot of things in the Bible with the knowledge that we have today. We can look at it through a different magnifying glass or a different portal, but the events are still there. The interpretation is a little different. But when you use today's science and today's physics and apply it to the Bible, in my opinion, it validates everything.
Yes, you see it.
Yes.
So I suppose in 2020, when during the pandemic and the riots and all this insanity, and I was in the National Guard, so I was being hit with all of that stuff here in California. I did riot control and went out on training for that. Other people went out, did food banks. Other people, so in the midst of all of this, the Navy decided, well, now we're going to do a 180, and the military is going to say, here's what we saw. We don't know what it is. And put it on the news. So I guess the men in black got laid off because that was their whole job, to make people shut up. And now suddenly you have the source who's usually denying this stuff or contriving, weather phenomenon or some stupid excuse. They're coming forward and saying, we're validating what we saw via radar, via sonar, via pilots in the air, via seamen on the deck of an aircraft carrier. We're seeing stuff in the water going 5 times faster than our nuclear subs, and it's freaking us out. And we're seeing that stuff in the water come out of the water and blast off into the outer space at Mach who knows what, because it goes faster than anything that we've ever seen. It does circles around our F-22s.
John, I hate to do this, but I've got to take a break. First of all, thank you very much for your service.
Thank you.
Men and women around the world who give up their time and who are willing to put their life to protect democracy and freedom. God bless you all. We'll be back on the other side of this break. John MILOR is our guest. JOHNMILOR.com is his website. This is the X, and I'm Rob McConnell. I'll be right back. John MILOR is our special guest. John, we were talking about the latest disclosure about what the Navy has caught on video and how it seems that certain members within the military establishment are, or were at the time, saying that these are questionable objects. We don't know what they are and so on. But I understand that recently the video footage of that was taken of the Tic Tac has been identified as a drone by some parts, and other parts say it was defective radar equipment and tracking equipment.
Well, that's why it's important to get multi-vector reports. You have people on the decks of the aircraft carrier that saw something flying that had no wings or any kind of a shape conducive to aerodynamics. It was in the shape of a Tic Tac. So even if they say it was a drone, how do you explain the fact that it's deploying anti-gravity technology that we supposedly don't have?
Is it possible that these are in fact top secret technologies that have either been developed by the United States, China, or Russia? And if so, this is very threatful to American airspace.
Yes, Marco Rubio said he hopes not. He hopes they're extraterrestrial.
Yeah,
Because if you think about what kind of power is employed to generate um, to generate the propulsion that these things are exhibiting, if it is defying gravity, is it capable of actually creating a wormhole? I mean, that's an enormous amount of power. So why would we be having an energy crisis and struggling with battery technology where you can't even drive to another state with your EV car if we have technology so advanced that, I mean, the amount of power in that tic tac would dwarf the power that's on a an aircraft carrier.
right. But
So
isn't it? But let's look back. What 20, 30, 40? Well, at the time of Nikola Tesla, the experimentation that he was doing on free energy that was closed down very fast. Is it possible that we have actually progressed to this point, and that this technology does in fact exist, but because it would drain the revenue of the oil industry and the war machines that use the
yeah,
fossil
that's a
fuel.
theory.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I talk about all those different theories in the latest book. Like, um, so why did we change our complete? Why did we do a 180?
yeah.
I mean, that's uh, it explains a lot. But I would think that um, if it was another country that developed this, that they would own us pretty much, especially in terms of the technology. They'd way dwarf us. So it's hard to say that it's another country like China, seeing that they're not completely dominating us. They're struggling economically.
Sure. Is it possible
So
that this technology is actually American technology?
yeah, is it
And that,
ours?
yeah,
If it's ours, I don't think we came up with it. I think we reverse engineered it, and a lot of our
Mhm.
reverse engineering dates back to the incident in 1948, Roswell. That's supposedly where fiber optics came from, and even little things like Velcro.
Yeah, but we
Um,
we know now that Velcro, fiber optics, Kevlar wasn't and had nothing to do with Roswell. I think that Roswell, people put a lot of faith in Roswell where that faith isn't deserved. I think that, when you've got authors like Kevin Randall, who at one stage was fully for Roswell, and during the course of his investigation and years looking into Roswell, saying, wait a minute, there's a lot of contradiction here. There's a lot of people who are saying things that never happened. So who do we believe?
yeah,
Especially when there's no hard evidence to substantiate any of the claims, John.
right. Well, determining where the technology came from, if
Hmm.
it's from us, developed by us with no assistance whatsoever, then you have the whole other biblical angle. So my research is, I look at both scientific and theological aspects of it. And the Bible says that in the end times, we're going to see a return to the days of Noah. Jesus said that. Luke 17, Matthew 24. And when you look at the days of Noah, out of all of history, he chooses Genesis 6 to point at and to describe as the things that are going to be happening in the end times. And Genesis 6 is when we had direct open contact with beings from other worlds that were intermarrying with people,
The Nephilim.
polluting, yes, the Nephilim, and
Yeah.
polluting our society genetically. And we got corrupt in every way imaginable, so bad that God had to wipe everything out in order to save us. It was like the nuclear option, because there was only one family left on the entire
Hmm.
planet worth saving. And even the animal kingdom was corrupt because the Nephilim, it was no holds barred. They were destroying everything. So if we're going to Bible tells us that that's what's coming in our
Hmm.
future. And then you see other elements of it. You see it in Revelation, where it talks about you're going to see signs and wonders in the sky. You read about Satan being cast down to the earth. You read about these otherworldly battles in Daniel, where it talks about we're going to be fighting with the host of heaven. So
it's funny you should mention the other battles. I had John Brandenburg on a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying that they found elements of xenon on Mars that can only be replicated or could only be found or created by nuclear blasts. And his theory is that 300 million years ago, there was a nuclear war on Mars, and that's why Mars is desolate and totally void.
Yeah. So there's different theories about what happened on Mars. In my first book, I write about Mars, about Hoagland's exploded planet hypothesis that he talked about how Astera, there used to be another planet in our solar system, and that's what is now the asteroid belt, and this planet blew up. But his theory, I believe, was that that was a stronghold of, like Satan's stronghold, one of his strongholds. His kingdom was actually here on earth, and it actually even says that in Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28. He was in the garden of God. This was before he sinned. So that predates humanity. That's during the time of the pre-Adamites and an angelic civilization that once existed here on earth, where you had some were mortal and some were immortal. So there's this whole civilization here. And when Satan sinned, he led a rebellion that started here on earth into the heavens and against God's throne, and God put it down. And I believe Hoagland's theory was that there used to be another planet there. It was part of Satan's complex. It was a multi-world complex that he was in charge of. And that planet blew up. A chunk of it hit Mars. And you can even see the scarring on the planet. A chunk of it hit Saturn. And Saturn, the ring of Saturn, is vertical. So it's an oddball setup when you look at it. The only way you can figure it out is to suggest that it got hit by something really hard and twisted it on its axis. And now the ring, here's the sun, and Saturn's going around the sun. And that the ring's not like this. The ring is like that, perpendicular to the sun. So it's weird. And there's a number of anomalies like that in our solar system that suggests that there used to be another planet here and it blew up. So they had what they called the failed accretion theory, where a bunch of matter collected, but it never quite had enough gravity to create a planet. And so that's what our asteroid belt is. But the counter theory to that is the exploded planet hypothesis, is that there was a planet and it blew up. And now that's the asteroid belt. And chunks of that planet, when it blew up, one chunk hit the Earth and wiped out everything here. So when you look at our fossil record, you see 5 extinction events, and that was one of them. And I believe there's a crater off the coast of Florida that's like 100 miles wide under the ocean. And that was probably the planet killer that hit us, and that's possibly could have come from that explosion. And a piece of it hit Mars, and a piece, wiped out the atmosphere on Mars. They knew that there was water on Mars too. So how can you have water there? For the longest time, we didn't think that it had enough gravity to have water, but they find sediment, which is evidence of water. So, you had probably a thriving civilization on Mars, and maybe Saturn.
Well, if you have nuclear explosions and a nuclear holocaust on a planet where there's xenon present, that would explain what happened to Mars. But my question is, why do you think there's this race to go to Mars if it's a dead planet? Like, what's the sense? Why are we spending so much money on that when we could be spending it on the poor, the hungry, the sick, and the needs of humanity here on Earth?
First of all, I did see this documentary on the moon that was just shocking,
Mhm.
pretty amazing. That they think the moon's hollow. They've even made movies now
Oh,
that are
yeah.
kind of based on this, but some from the things that they found. Um, Apparently, there's this gigantic dome structure on the dark side of the moon, and that's where China went. And China released their video footage, and we had guys that intercepted the footage, which wasn't encrypted. And you look at a lot of these moon photos in some of these areas, and you see these vertical lines in the background, and everybody has always assumed that that was a slicing of the photographs in order to make
Mhm.
a continuous scene. But it turns out there was no splicing and slicing going on. That's the actual picture. And there's nothing really legitimate to explain these vertical lines in a lot of these pictures, from what I read. And they
Yeah.
say that is where they messed up and actually included that dome structure that's in the background, and it's massive, uh, hundreds of miles, but it's all busted up. And so they say that this thing was destroyed probably well over 100,000 years ago. But the whole theory is that the moon is an artificial structure that was created, as like an observation post for the Earth, maybe.
If it's an artificial structure, how can it affect the Earth's gravitational pull? That makes no sense. If it was an artificial structure, there'd be no tides because it's the gravitational pull from the moon that creates the tides.
Well, anything that's going to be that big is going to have a gravitational pull.
Not if it's hollow.
Well, it depends on what kind of metal it's made out of, too. And even if it's hollow, it's still going to
Mhm.
have a mass to it that's going to be big.
So,
So,
so if it
yeah.
is hollow, and if there is this base on the dark side of the moon, how come it wasn't, like how come there was no news about this when the Americans did all these Apollo missions? Because you had the command module that was circling the moon, the prelim flights to the lunar area to test prior to landing. There were never any reports from any credible source of these bases or this dome. Why is it when only the Chinese go up there and it's a signal that's intercepted because it wasn't encrypted? Now, are the Chinese that stupid that they wouldn't encrypt their transmissions? So
They might not have cared.
it's a great theory.
Yeah.
It sounds like the stuff that science fiction is made of.
Well, they compiled a bunch of different things together. Some of it came from Edgar Mitchell. And it is a well-known fact that when they took off from the lunar surface
Mhm.
and they ejected that
The lemon.
component,
Mhm.
that when it struck the moon, it rang like a bell for 4 hours.
How do
And
we know that?
that totally mystified them. They had it on a recording, and I actually heard the recording. You can search that and find
Mm.
it.
Listen, you and I have to take our break at the bottom of the hour. Exxon Nation, John and I will be back as we continue here in the Exxon from our broadcast center and studio PH2 in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. I'm Rob McConnell. Don't go away. And we're back. Neither one of us have been abducted by aliens, so the show shall continue. John Miller is our guest, johnmiller.com. John, have you yourself seen a UFO?
So I have seen falling stars
Mhm.
that suddenly did a right turn and shot off. So, that probably was a UFO because I don't know of, anything that can change trajectory like that. And I did see a glowing ball of light in the jungle of Panama. It's about the size of a soccer ball. So
Wow.
I don't know if you'd constitute that as a UFO or a probe or an entity. I think it was a living entity of some sort, some like transdimensional thing. And so, yeah, but I know for sure my great grandmother did see one, and my sister maybe encountered, it's hard to say whether it was a ghost, an angel, an alien, a time traveler.
Wow.
Don't know, but that was just the craziest story that she had. And I don't know if I told you that one.
No, I don't think so. Can you share it with us?
She used to live on an island in the middle of the Mississippi River. So the Mississippi is a really, really big river for those that don't know, because it was pretty wide on both sides of the island, and the island was 5 miles wide itself.
Wow.
So you had to take a ferry to
Mhm.
get to the island. Didn't have any cars. There was a tractor on the island. So she drove the tractor out, and it had a wagon attached, and took us to her little shack. And this place was like, it was the coolest place, and it would have been the perfect place to film a horror movie, because it had all the ingredients. You're completely isolated, no phone.
Uh-huh.
And this shack was next to a hunting lodge, which was like this basic, gigantic, big cafeteria type facility with a tin roof. And it had like a big kitchen, and then like bunks, where hunters could go, and they rent the place out. And then it was a seasonal hunting thing that they would go there. And then during the off season, it's just like, good 6 to 8 months, nobody was there. And it was her and her husband. And on the other side of the island, 8 miles away, was another guy. So 3 people on the entire island. And that's it. Complete isolation. So she was really glad when we came to visit her. And I remember that place. It's just really pretty cool. And there's a lot of history there from the Civil War, too. She said you could pick musket balls out of some of the trees. You could find them and stuff. But a lot of weird things happened on the island. One time they were just sitting there eating their lunch, having a picnic, and they heard an explosion that shook the ground. And they were looking around like, what the hell was that? But the freakiest thing of all was one night they were in their shack. James was on the couch, had his gun broken down into all these pieces, and he was cleaning his rifle. And she was in the kitchen around the corner. And the front door opened up, and a guy walked into the middle of the living room, and stopped and looked around like, wait a minute, this isn't right. And he's like looking around, and he was wearing this sort of a powder bluish uniform that looked similar to like a military uniform. Blonde hair, blue eyes, about 6 foot average, just normal looking guy. Weird thing was, though, is it was raining outside. And in Mississippi, when it rains, it no kidding rains. You don't go out there and not get wet and muddy. The mud is like 6 inches thick.
Ooh.
And there's even a beer named after it, Mississippi Mud. I mean, it's like this really clay, doughy stuff. It's very difficult to walk in. This guy comes in and his boots are spit shined. I mean, they're polished boots, and he's not wet or anything. So something's completely off.
Right.
On top of that, the door was shut, and they had a bunch of dogs laying in front of the door. And somehow he walked through it as if none of that was there. Just opened it and walked right in. And looked around like he's appraising the situation and realizes something's not right. And he looks down and he sees James sitting on the couch, and he smiles at him. So this isn't like a ghost recording of time or whatever, where this thing is not sentient of its surroundings or whatever, or it's trapped in the past or whatever. This dude knew where he was at, and something was off, or like somebody screwed something up, or what. Don't know. But he realized, I'm not supposed to be here. And he smiled like he was embarrassed. He waved, turned around, walked right back out, and shut the door.
Unreal.
James was like, sitting there gagging. Sharon felt something when she was in the kitchen cooking, and she looked around the corner just in time to see the guy's bootleg pass through the door, and the door shut. And she looked at James, and he couldn't talk. He was just catatonic. And she's like, what was that? and and finally he jumped off the couch and gun parts flying everywhere, and he ran over to the door, went to open it, and he had to shove it open and push the dogs out from the door. They were still huddled against the door for warmth. And he ran out, and it was like storming and lightning and rain everywhere, mud all over the place, and that guy's gone. And he came back in, and that was at the point when my sister lost it. She fell on the ground. She was crying. She was shaking. She said it's like she felt like she went into shock because reality just went
out the door,
out the door,
so to speak.
And yeah, it freaked her out bad. And my sister's not easily rattled. She was the one that, when she was a kid, there was a haunted house down the street, and she wanted to go check it out. And there was another friend that we had that they supposedly had a ghost named Roger, and she wanted to go down into the basement and talk to Roger and was trying to convince us to go with her. So we're like, no. So this freaked her out. But she remembered it. And so for the longest time, she was just trying to figure out, like, what was that, and I wrote an article about it I put on my website called Angels Unaware or Unaware Angels. And it almost seemed to me like somebody was meaning to go to a specific time and place, maybe during the Civil War, and do an important function and then check out without being noticed. But somebody switched the dial to the wrong time and place, and he walked in and like, 100 years off on this one, or 130 or 40 years. That's kind of the feeling I got, because he seemed like he was totally aware of where he was at, and some kind of mistake was made.
John, stand by. We've got to take our final break. X-Zone Nation, if you'd like to find out more about John, if you'd like to get any of his books. How many, last time you and I talked, you had 13 books that were written. How many books do you have now?
Yeah, I still have 13.
And they're available online at Amazon.com?
Amazon and JohnMILOR.com.
All right, stand by, my friend. We'll be back. And wow, fascinating story. This is the X-Zone. I'm Rob McConnell. We're coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, studio number PH2. We'll be right back. Don't go away. And speaking about Beautiful Mind Coffee is the official coffee of the X-Zone Radio TV show. And I am told that in the very near future, Beautiful Mind Coffee will be available, as well as Amazon.ca, Amazon.com. John MILOR is our guest. First of all, John, I want to thank you ever so much for joining us. Always a great pleasure talking to you. You're a very interesting young man. And once again, thank you very much for your service.
Young.
Well, listen. I remember when Fred Flintstone and Barney Rubble went to high school with me, so you're young. John, is it possible that the UFOs that we're seeing might be from a different dimension or coming through a wormhole? And because I would imagine that if they're using technology to traverse the universe, that they leave their home planet a long, long time ago. So, quantum physics is saying there's more than the 3 dimensions. Some of them say 11 dimensions. Multi-universe theory. What is your take on this?
So, first of all, if they are coming from other planets in the solar system, or not in our solar system, like Alpha Centauri, for example,
right.
The closest one is 11 light years away. That's not going to happen unless you're able to punch a hole, in the universe and create a wormhole. And if you're doing that, then you are multidimensional by definition. You're transitioning from one dimension to another. And I talk a little bit about that, how physics is finally getting to the point where our math is able to see things beyond. And it's sort of cool how that can happen, because even just a basic explanation of it, I heard it described as, first of all, there's Pythagorean's theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So we know that that's true. Do the math, you can see it. You can actually apply that to a cube. A squared plus b squared plus c squared equals d squared. So you got this 3-dimensional cube, this, equals this distance through the center of the cube.
Mm-hmm.
So if it works with 2 dimensions and it works with 3 dimensions, it probably works with 4, 5.
Yeah.
You name it. Now, what does that 5th dimension look like? We don't know. Numerically.
No, but they've got great songs, Wedding Bells Blue and
Yeah.
One Less Bell to Answer, Aquarius.
Yeah. So the cool thing is, numerically, we could do the math. It's almost like that chicken, the little chicken on Foghorn Leghorn, where he does the math. And
oh my gosh, yeah.
and Foghorn hides in this thing, and the little chicken goes out in the middle of the yard and pulls him out of the ground.
Right.
He's like, "How'd you do that?" He goes to look in the sheds. No, I better not look. I just might be in there.
Yeah, isn't that Henrietta's son?
Yes.
My gosh.
So that's the kind of math we're talking about, where people like Einstein and, there's people like that today too, that quantitatively we can do calculations and say, you know what, there's too much mass out there that, what we're seeing here doesn't make sense unless we have other dimensions to account for it. And the latest theory is the M theory. And you have movies like Sliders and stuff, which is dated, but you have all these new movies now that incorporate our multidimensional universe. And the funny thing is, the Bible's talked about that all along.
Yeah.
That our Earth is multidimensional. It's like an onion. And it talks about hell in a lower level. And most people think, it's like some cavernous place inside the Earth. And it's like, it's probably a smaller planet in a lower dimension, and it's a really bad place, and you don't want to be there. And Earth in a higher dimension. So Bible talks about the levels of heaven, sky, outer space, Shamaim and Oranios for the Greek word, and that's the most widely used translation for the word heaven, which is plural, the heavens.
Yeah.
So angels come from literally the heavens, according to the Bible. That's outer space. And the third heaven is God's throne, which, if you're reading scripture and you look at all the things that are there, there's a sky, there's trees, there's animals, there's a city, New Jerusalem. And that city is going to be transported to the earth in the future. So if it's not a physical city, how is it going to be transported to a physical earth? So you have descriptions in the Bible that have been there all along that tell us about our multiverse that we live in. So angels or aliens coming from other worlds that are also other dimensions is nothing new. The Bible actually describes that.
All is possible. John, we've got about 3 minutes left. What are your final words for the listening and viewing audience of the X Zone Nation tonight?
Well, my final words, I'm going to just say, kind of take a prophetic note and just say the things that are coming into the world, be ready for it, that it shouldn't be any surprise when we start seeing crazy stuff going on and aliens and stuff suddenly become part of our reality, that the Bible predicted this. Jesus said that this was going to happen. And that's mainly why I wrote my book. People don't have to abandon their faith based on the things that they're going to be seeing in the future, even though there's going to be all kinds of people that are interpreting it, saying, here's how you have to interpret what's going on. You have to believe in evolution. You have to believe in all of these different things. And that's not true. So that's why I wrote this book, Christian UFOlogy, and some of these other books, The Strong Delusion. And if I'm wrong, then I'm wrong, and then all this stuff doesn't happen. But if you start to see things if they do public disclosure and other things like that start happening, please consider getting my book then, because I'm talking about a lot of these things, and I'm saying, hey, here's a list of things that are going to happen in our future.
Yeah. And they're available at johnmilor.com and Amazon. John, I want to thank you so much for joining us. Always a great pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to the next time we meet back here in the X Zone. Until then, take care of yourself, my friend, and Happy New Year.
Okay, thank you.
All right, X Zone Nation, that's it for this segment. I'll be back later on tonight. So if you're watching us, this is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell, and thank you very much for joining us.